right, everybody, we are back, and we are back with more of your questions. And Michelle, I think you have a question for me.
I do, and this one was submitted via Instagram,
Okay.
and uh, they are looking for a suggestion or suggestions for upper class white students answering the mandatory short answer diversity question.
Sure. So diversity question, I mean, it can be asked in many different ways, but this is in some cases a new question, not always, but in some cases a new question that colleges have added to their applications since the Supreme Court ruling that struck down the use of race and ethnicity in admissions considerations. And so I think what I would say, just to back up slightly, is that that ruling is a challenging one for many colleges who, most of whom have a goal of admitting a diverse group of students so that their campuses are places of learning and not echo chambers. I think that one of the challenges of tying, they are linked, the SCOTUS ruling and some of these new questions that have been introduced, but it does kind of paint a very narrow picture of diversity, which is basically that it's about racial or ethnic background. But diversity comes in many different forms. And it can be socioeconomic status, it can be geographic status, it can be any kind of, there are so many different ways in which you and I are different from each other, in which we are different from all of our colleagues, in which I am different from my neighbors, right? So every person is unique and diverse in their own ways. And so what I would say is that colleges are, looking to see, how are you engaging with people who are different from who you are? And what would you highlight as some of the things that are a little bit more unique about you? And, the question sort of specifically referenced upper class white students, which I suppose implies that they don't have diversity, but I would argue that they have their own experiences in life and their own backgrounds. And there are a lot of different things that I think students could talk about. So they could look at, what are the different places where I fit in, and what might I highlight about those. I think it's a difficult thing to talk about and to offer suggestions for without knowing more about the student. So I think the best thing is that a colleague of mine wrote a really excellent blog about this. And there are some resources linked in the blog, but there's also just a really thoughtful suggestions about how to think about this question and respond to it on your own. So the title of the blog is Sharing Your Identity in College Essays. And if you want to find it, you could go to our blog.getintocollege, all one word. So blog.getintocollege.com. And / sharing your identity in college essays, or just go to the blog.getintocollege.com and search for sharing your identity in college essays. It will pop that blog right up. There are a lot of good ideas in there, tips, as I mentioned, they're even linked to a resource you can use to think a little bit more about your own background. And that's really where I would suggest that you start out for that one.
Great.
All right, Michelle, I've got another question for you.
All
right, here we go. This is, I think, one for, well, the writer may not be aware that the FAFSA isn't yet available, but they're saying they didn't complete the FAFSA for my daughter because I didn't think I'd qualify for financial aid. I just attended a financial aid Zoom meeting that the high school put on, though, and they said everyone should complete a FAFSA. Can we still do it now? Yes.
Yeah.
All of my daughter's college applications are in, and we've already received decisions from a couple of them. That's exciting. Michelle, what say you?
Okay, so I'd say that there's a couple components to think about here. A lot of times, high school guidance office, admission offices, and we've seen it where even states have now mandated that it's a graduation requirement for seniors to complete the FAFSA. And some schools look at that as another metric for them, that if they have a 100% or a very high percentage of families that fill out the FAFSA, that they're doing their job. To your point, simply stated, does a family have to fill out the FAFSA? The answer to that is no. However, there are a lot of reasons to think about why you might want to complete the FAFSA for all families. And you had mentioned this in the question, it's never too late. So this listener said they received a couple of admission decisions already. That's great. You don't have to apply for financial aid or fill out the FAFSA before you get those admission decisions. A lot of times, if schools are asking for that, they are just wanting to provide you the financial aid information in a more timely manner. So it's never too late. Some things to think about why to fill out the FAFSA. If you want your student to have access to the federal direct student loan, which has a subsidized component where the government pays the interest, and an unsubsidized component, even though there is an annual borrowing limit for students, I talk to families all the time that want their student to have some financial skin in the game.
Right.
They want them to recognize that this is part of an investment in themselves, not just from the parent, but financially for themselves as well. And quite honestly, I have found through the many years I've been in this industry, students do so much better if they have some financial skin in the game.
Yeah.
And it's a great learning lesson from a financial wellness and literacy perspective. They learn how to build credit. They learn what principal is, interest, and get accustomed to the whole debt management credit perspective.
Right.
So that's one reason to think about, because you have to complete the FAFSA for that, because that's really is the application.
Right.
Another item to think about is there are some schools out there that do require the FAFSA in order for the student to be considered for merit. Now, sometimes I feel like we contradict ourselves because we get asked, is the financial information looked at when determining admissions and awarding merit scholarships? And, normally we say merit scholarships are not based on financial need, which quite honestly, they're not for the most part.
Right.
But I can give families an example on where requiring the FAFSA may be relevant. If we look at the state of California, for example, they have a very generous and nice, I would say, state grant scholarship program. And so schools like the UCs or the Cal States, they might require the FAFSA in order to consider the students for a merit scholarship, just as a double check. Because if that student and family fills out the FAFSA and they qualify for any federal aid that's need-based or a state scholarship, that's money from the institution that they can give somebody else.
Yeah.
So that is another way to look at why some schools may require the FAFSA in awarding merit scholarships. So I always tell families, for any school the student is looking at applying to check their merit scholarship information, check the financial aid information, look for priority deadlines, and look under the merit scholarships on whether or not the FAFSA is required to be considered for merit.
Right. And actually, I think the really important point about the California one that you just made is that they're asking for that information, not so that they can not give you merit aid, but so that they can maximize their ability to give aid to as many students as possible. Right. So in your example, they're potentially able to give this family some aid in the portion of like federal aid, and then they still might give them the state grant aid, but they have to take less of it, and then they have more, which means they can give it to other students, right? So I know that there can be this animosity, this idea that, well, they're using information against me, when often they're trying to use it so that they can maximize the money that they have. So it's not using it. Yeah. I mean, again, they are trying to figure out how much you can afford, but if you're not applying for aid but they're going to award some merit money, that it makes sense they would do it. They're not wielding that information against you, I think, is the key.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think a key point for merit is schools are not looking at the FAFSA as, or the ability or inability to pay
Yes.
for a family when awarding those institutional merit dollars.
Right. They're basically using them to try and get as many students to want to come to their school as possible. And yeah, there's lots of different calculations that go into how they do that, that we don't have time for today.
Yeah,
And right. So
right.
got it. Anything else on that front, or you have?
No, no, I think that I covered everything.
All right. Sounds good. I think we have time for one more, depending on how much I talk, maybe two, but I think probably
Okay.
just one more.
All right. All right. So, is the GPA more or less important than the essays and the activities?
Okay, so great question. And anyone who has listened to any episodes of this show are going to be very familiar with this phrase, which is, it depends.
Yeah.
So what I would say is this: there are many, many schools in this country, more than not, probably 79 to 80% of the schools in this country, where that are looking primarily at what did you take in high school and how did you do in those classes. And so they're primarily focused on your academic record. And if you're where they want you to be, welcome to the school. And if you're not, well, sorry, we don't have a spot for you, right? That is because about 79 to 80% of the colleges in this country admit more than half of their applicant pools in a given year. So they're going to be very predictable, and their process is primarily focused on how you did in class. The more selective you get, the more applicants that will be in those applicant pools who can easily come and do the work, right? They've shown that through their transcripts, through what they've taken and how they've done in the class. And so what you're doing outside of the classroom, from the activities that you're involved in, to what your letters of recommendation have to say about you, to what you have to say about yourself in your essays, your personal presentation, are take on much greater importance. And when you are at the most selective levels, the expectation is that you've done spectacular work in the classroom, but that's just a baseline expectation, because so many of the students in the applicant pool will have done spectacular work in the classroom. And so what takes a student there from simply being a strong application, a competitive application, to a compelling one that gets in, are going to be all of those other pieces: the what you do outside of the classroom, what you share about yourself in your essays and your personal presentation, and what your recommendation writers have to say about you. So, you know, if you don't have the grades, then the rest of it is nice, but probably also not going to move the needle. But having the grades on their own is rarely, really never going to be enough at the most selective level, because show me 40,000 applicants to Harvard, and I will tell you that probably 30,000, and I'm probably being conservative here, 30,000 have done spectacularly well in their courses and their grades. So how do you get down to the maybe 3,000 acceptances you're going to send out in order to yield your class? And it may not even be 3,000. So, again, the more selective you get, the more important those other pieces are going to be. Michelle, thank you so much. I talked enough, and as I anticipated, there's no room for another question. Thanks to Michelle and all my guests. Next week, Shannon is here, and she's going to be talking about financial aid for spring transfers, men's colleges, and State Department sponsored pre-college programs. We'll see you next week.